Marble games are pretty common in the indie world, and whether it's the monkey ball alike of Paper Ball or the Marble Blast's spiritual successor Marble It Up, it's easy to see why. Ball physics are pretty easy to do, they can support a wide range of visual styles and tones, and you don't have to animate a character, you just rotate a sphere. There's enough of them that I could probably do a whole Blips episode on marble games entirely, ranging from maso-core platformers to cutesy hacking games. I have a weird fascination with how simple and yet versatile this particular sort of game can be. Today, though, I'm looking at just one entry into this subgenre, Venineth. Venineth is a bit hard to explain because it's real easy to be reductive about it in a way that I don't think does the game justice. If I wanted to be flippant, I'd say it's a puzzle platformer where you roll a marble around and use various power-ups and level-specific mechanic gimmicks to manipulate the environment and open up a path to the exit. You've seen games like that a million times, from Braid to Trine to Portal. And it is that kind of game, but I think that kind of undersells what it's got going for it. First of all, look at this game. I don't know how much YouTube video compression is going to muddy the footage, because the game's got a grainy noise filter on it that almost certainly looks more crisp and raw footage, but even so, there's no denying that the game is striking. You're traveling across landscapes that look like old 1990s Bryce 3D renders of abstract landscapes, or maybe Trapper Keeper art with all the neon hues pulled out and replaced with more natural shades of brown and green and blue. There's something undeniably powerful about these geometric shapes jutting out of otherwise natural vistas, cones and toruses suspended in midair over a shimmering sea, huge monoliths to order and logic cast against indifferent and formless wastelands. Calm synthy music plays in the background, and combined with the sprawling panoramas highlighted by a really wide field of view and the deliberate nature of the game's movement, and Venineth creates this lonely but chillish vibe that I'd compare to something like the underwater bits of Donkey Kong Country, or maybe walking around on the surface of Zebes in Super Metroid. It's a tone that is at once peaceful and serene, yet isolating and even intimidating. You are small and alone and adrift in a universe whose planets do not care about you and whose technology you do not understand. Video game essayist Pixeladay wrote about the horror of the sublime in Subnautica and The Long Dark, and I feel like she captures in her words a lot of what this game is going for.
The unique combination of awe and terror has a name. The Romantics called it the sublime. The sublime is being struck so hard by the power and vastness of nature that all thought is blasted away, and what's left is pure emotion. The kind of pleasurable terror that erupts inside you when you watch footage of a violent storm or gaze into the cold infinity of space. It's not the same thing as fear, which is caused by the imminent threat of death. It's more of an existential horror, conjured by the sudden awareness of your own insignificance in the face of something vast and unknown.
She's also really underappreciated, so check her stuff out. The point is, Venineth definitely has a distinct mood about it, and that does a lot of the heavy lifting in what could have otherwise just been a marble puzzle platformer. The other thing that kind of separates Venineth from other puzzle platformers is that it's not hard exactly, but it expects you to maybe be a bit of a veteran marble game player. There are a lot of puzzles that rely on you knowing how to kind of bounce the right way, or control your momentum appropriately. The orb in this game has a lot of oomph behind it, so you need to be careful how much speed you choose to pick up, and even minor course corrections can be difficult to commit to. The controls aren't unresponsive or floaty, it's just that the marble has so much mass that movement has to be deliberate. Solving a lot of puzzles in Venineth is dependent upon knowing when to be delicate and when to slam out of control into a rock for the perfect bounce in order to make progress. And outside of optional hint markers that indicate parts of the map you haven't explored yet, it's not really a game that holds your hand, and these levels can be pretty large. In addition to the physics and level design complicating things, there's also the fact that Venineth avoids words more or less entirely in favor of an abstract, implicitly alien technology. The game opens with you in a sterile metal room where you enter what I can only call a Stargate and arrive on the first level, then watch as it closes behind you. To unlock new levels, you sometimes have to complete smaller puzzles in a space-like void, as if aligning satellites or activating some kind of gateway. And each level has its own mechanical devices and power-ups that, when discovered, leave it to you to uncover exactly what they do and exactly how to use them to progress. This extends all the way to its menus, which use a sort of xenosymbology to let you start a new game or quit playing that you need to decipher yourself. These arcane puzzles in a game that has an art style that evokes early 3D renders makes it hard to escape the sensation that I was playing something that crossed Marble Blast with Myst or Riven, rolling a ball around and doing platforming tricks, while also exploring beautiful, abstract alien worlds full of technology I didn't build or understand, but had to learn to use in order to escape. Venineth can be frustrating. Its puzzle solutions are at times obtuse or finicky, knowing how to proceed can sometimes be a mystery, and if you haven't had any experience with marble games or a fair number of puzzle platformers, this might not be an ideal entry point into this particular subgenre. But it is gorgeous, and this tension between motion and stillness, the frustrating and the engaging, the alien and the familiar, the serene and the sublime, all make it one of the better puzzle platformers I've played in years. If this particular game seems like it vibes with you, I'd really recommend it. As I've made clear on this show before, I'm a sucker for conspiracy games. I love the paranoia, the complicated webs of motivations, and the detective work of getting to the truth. It's part of why I love Deus Ex, and fell so hard for Is the President a Traitor? But one thing you almost never get to do, even in conspiracy games, is make a good old-fashioned red-threaded link board. Call of Duty actually has a conspiracy board in it this year, but it's basically a glorified level select screen. But I'm talking about being able to do the real work, posting images and articles and linking the connections between them as you find them. Enter A Hand with Many Fingers. A Hand with Many Fingers is kind of like if Sam Barlow of Her Story fame wanted to make a documentary game about a conspiracy. It doesn't tell a story per se, but instead asks you to decode one from the documents it provides, if you can find them. But unlike Her Story, the approach isn't VHS tapes and a rudimentary search engine, it's newspaper clippings, headshots, and internal documents uncovered through archival research. To discover which articles you'll need to pull from the archives, you'll need to correlate a region, year, and name. This will help you narrow down an entry in the card catalog that describes all of the archive documents on hand. On that card catalog will be a code number, and that code number corresponds to a bin down in the archive vault. Once you've retrieved the bin, you can post new findings up on the board, drawing thread between your documents as you find new connections that piece your story together. Maybe this new documentation ties a specific character you already know to a meeting in Europe in 1977, or maybe you know that something happened in America in 1976, but you just can't tie it to a name and thus can't look it up yet. In this way, the game really makes use of its link board. It isn't just a cute piece of visual flair, you'll really need to use it to help uncover the truth and find the connections that let you move forward. Also necessary is a pen and paper. The game's actually pretty upfront about this. It says that it plays best if you're able to take notes. A Hand with Many Fingers doesn't offer you any help. There are no floating compasses to the right bin once you've found a valid archival code or whatever. You just have to write down or memorize the number and then go downstairs into the archives and pull the right bin. This just further pushes the early 80s library research vibe to the whole thing. You're writing down codes on paper to pull them from an archive, then cross-referencing names and dates and locations to piece together a complicated history. In some sense, it's an arcadey version of the Dewey Decimal System, a ludic ode to the library sciences. It is doing a book report in the 1980s turned into a video game. A Hand with Many Fingers also has this wonderful atmosphere of conspiratorial paranoia. The archive itself is particularly creepy. It's dimly lit but not dark, and the fluorescent lights will occasionally flicker and hum unexpectedly. And there are all sorts of ambient noises, from a persistent bassy hum, to air conditioner noises, to the sound of people stomping about. Maybe a floor above or below, but also maybe just the next row over, stealing the truth out from under you. The whole thing is just soaked in this creepy vibe. Not scary, but still deeply unsettling and unpleasant. It gives me going into grandma's basement when you were 7 years old vibes. And there are more explicit threats than just the creepy basement. A car will idle outside of your office and then peel away as you enter. You'll see rooms across the street with figures in them looking down that will quickly kill their lights when you turn to face them as you emerge from the archive. There are menacing phone calls that are silent when you answer them, and missing documents that might hold the key to unlock this whole case that are simply not in the archives. Who took them? Who is to say? The whole thing has an air of getting closer and closer to a truth that a nebulous they don't want you to discover. Except the they isn't that nebulous. And what's shocking is that the conspiracy you're uncovering really happened. Like, I don't want to spoil too much of the game, but the fact that it opens with Nugan Hand Bank co-founder Frank Nugan's body being found in an apparent suicide in a town 2 hours outside of Sydney should let people aware of this story know what it's about pretty much immediately. It was a major scandal in Australia in the 80s and had international consequences. And as an American who wasn't born when all of this went down and was never taught it in school, it was actually really fascinating to learn about. And it's definitely a game with a point of view on these events, which I of course appreciate. But it does end up feeling a little bit heavy-handed. Like, on one hand, the game opens under a title card that says Capitalism and Conspiracy, which feels completely appropriate given what transpires. But on the other hand, it's the sort of game that scribbles, "the organized crime wing of the ruling class," in red ink next to the first reference to the CIA you find. And like, it's not wrong, the CIA are unequivocally bad. It's just utterly lacking in any subtlety. The paranoia stuff in the game and the fact that this conspiracy really happened are stronger arguments for the idea that the CIA are bad guys than scribbling an aside in a newspaper clipping with red ink. Like, I don't disagree with the sentiment, but the author feels a little too present in that moment, if that makes any sense. My only other real complaint is that the game does end on a bit of an anticlimax that I won't spoil here, but that didn't really work for me. Like, there's no way to actually crescendo or climax an investigation, especially one based on real events, other than, well, now you know. For the record, this was also a problem in her story and what gave rise to the famous "how do I know when I'm satisfied" tweet. But there's no trial to rush evidence to or confrontation to complete, so it just kind of limps away with the idea that conspirators are always watching and they're dangerous, but also kind of inept, which is fine, but it denies you any sense of catharsis or closure. It just kind of ends with, and now you know the rest of the story. Still, the act of piecing together the whole affair was really engaging. If you like conspiracy thrillers, putting together your own red string link board, figuring out plots using scant evidence, remembering the Nugan Hand fiasco, or just a really big fan of the library sciences and the Dewey Decimal System, this is definitely a game worth checking out. It's $5 on Steam and has a pay what you want option on itch, so I'd definitely recommend it. Speaking of uncovering mysteries, the next game we'll be looking at is Lucifer Within Us. It's by developer/publisher KitFox Games, who you may remember as being responsible for the comedic Fit for a King from a few episodes ago. This time, though, things are decidedly more serious. Lucifer Within Us is a short little murder mystery game consisting of 3 separate whodunits for you to solve. You play as Ada, an exorcist for a techno-religion that worships a god known as Ein Sof. When a murder is reported, it is your job to find out who is responsible, and then exorcise the demons that push them to commit such a heinous crime. Now, this opens up all sorts of questions about free will and the nature of evil that the game doesn't seem all that interested in. It's a lightly sketched cybernetic high fantasy world where demons exist and make you do murders, and you either kind of buy into that or not. Besides, what sells the game isn't really the world building for me so much as the crime solving. The tutorial is a little rough, but it's rough because it's got a fairly complicated set of deductive tools to explain, and not a lot of time to explain them given that there are only 3 missions including the first tutorial one. To solve crimes, you first gather physical evidence around the crime scene. This part is pretty straightforward. Walk around and click on things that get highlighted by your mouse. But then it gets interesting. You talk to each witness and they replay the events of the day.
Mother Miriam came to me for her consecration ceremony. I've performed this many times before, so I was confident.
As they tell you their side of the story, you will both see the scene play out from their perspective and see events tracking across a little tracker bar on the bottom of the screen. As you talk to multiple witnesses, you'll have multiple different stories all being told on the same timeline. This allows you to move to a specific point on the timeline and compare each person's account of events. And your goal is to suss out lies, either by pointing out the contradictions between their stories or by using the physical evidence you gathered to point out how their stories are necessarily incorrect. When lies are pointed out, they'll correct their stories, with individual events getting shorter and with more specificity. And if events are corroborated between stories, they'll be marked in gold so that you know that you don't have to worry about them. In some ways, Lucifer Within Us feels kind of like a cross between Tacoma and Phoenix Wright. Like Tacoma, the game involves watching characters go about their day multiple times, slowly refining and recontextualizing their actions as more information comes to light. Like Phoenix Wright, the game is all about catching people in lies. And they lie for different reasons, not just because they're guilty, but sometimes because they're forgetful or ashamed of the reason they did something that wasn't the crime, or have something else to hide entirely. It's a pleasantly character-driven detective system where solving crimes involves internalizing each person's story and finding the contradictions therein, and there's something really satisfying about being able to stop and go, you're full of crap, that didn't happen. It makes you feel really smart, and you get to call people on their BS, and it's just a really satisfying feeling. When you've cracked the case and it comes time to convict, you need to identify an opportunity, a means, and a motive. That is to say, you need to be able to point out when in their timeline that they were able to commit the crime, with what weapon they were able to accomplish it, and why they did it. The why part is maybe the least developed part of the game. As you uncover a character's lies, you'll slowly uncover aspects of their personality, and ultimately the final aspect is the reason they did what they did, why they committed the murder. Mostly it feels like a failsafe against just brute forcing your way to the conclusion of a level, given that the game only has like 3 suspects per mystery. You can't make a formal accusation until you have a motive, and you won't have a motive until you've busted up enough lies to get to their final personality trait. So you have to play the game in order to end the level. It's the one kind of wonky thing in an otherwise really great detective system, and it's not the worst thing in the world because all it's doing is making you play the game, but it does feel a little undercooked. Lucifer Within Us is actually one of the rare times where I really wish a game was longer. Don't get me wrong, for the plot that's there, the length is fine. Stretching it out any longer would have just been belaboring a story that really couldn't support solving 10 murders over 8 hours given the payoff it has. But the whole experience is over in 2 or 3 hours, and with only 3 cases it feels like there's a ton of potential left for this style of gameplay. I'd love to see these mechanics come back in a more traditional, maybe episodic detective story. Each chapter could be a bite-sized 45 minutes to an hour long murder mystery, and I think you could do a lot with that. I mean, that's largely the format that the Sherlock games have been using for years, and those things are pretty cool. As it stands, though, it's still a really fun detective system that I really enjoyed. If solving murders is your jam and you're tired of Victorian England crimes, or if you like telling NPCs to stuff it when they try to lie to you, it's worth a shot. It's very short, but it's also very sweet. So last year was a year of games suddenly getting very popular due in part to quarantine. Titles like Fall Guys, Animal Crossing, Among Us, and Hades. Hades was an interesting one. Released in 2019 in early access on the Epic Store, the game found new life when it hit 1.0 and was also released on Steam and the Nintendo Switch. It was a narrative-driven roguelite that was unabashedly horny, and people really loved that.
And here you are again. You're slow to learn the way of things, I see.
I may be slow to learn, but at least I'm rather patient.
This talk about your patience is beginning to test mine. Enough. Come on and die.
But Hades isn't the only narrative-focused dungeon-crawling roguelike adventure out there. And this one's less horny, but it is 3D. Going Under is a game where you play as Jacqueline, an intern at Fizzle, a soft drink/software company that's not entirely sure what its business model is. Fizzle, a subsidiary of Cubicle, has all the amenities a modern tech company employee could want. Inspiring slogans on the walls, an open floor plan, beanbag chairs on the ground, and super fun slides to move between floors. Unfortunately, it also happens to lease office space in the same complex that once held companies like dating app WinkyDink, gig economy site Joblin, and cryptocurrency platform Stixcoin. When these companies went under, they literally went under, becoming dungeons beneath the office space where the employees were turned into appropriately themed monsters. And upon arriving to her first day at the internship at Fizzle, Jacqueline is tasked with going down and cleaning out the dungeons to get magical office artifacts left behind by the former tenants. It's not really what someone who thought she had gotten a marketing and PR internship thought she'd be doing, but what choice does she have? She needs the references and experience. It's interesting to compare Hades and Going Under to me, because both use the repetition of the task, but in fundamentally different ways. Hades frames it as an epic Sisyphean task, with Zagreus forever fated to struggle against his father to escape the underworld without ever truly finding his freedom. In Going Under, doing dungeon runs is, well, it's a grind. When you beat or fail a dungeon, the summary of your adventure is framed as an employee review, and given that you fail more often than you win in a roguelite, you will fail a lot of employee reviews. And as you level individual power-ups, they can become endorsed skills, LinkedIn style, that allow you to start a run with them enabled. Every employee gives you random tasks to complete while in the dungeons, and as you complete them, you level up their ability to mentor you, which comes with associated perks. Everyone is your boss, and your work is never done. That's not to say everyone you work with in the game is a jerk. While they're all broad, one-note caricatures like the grumpy programmer girl, the stoner dude, or the exasperated accountant trying to keep the company under control and under budget, they're all written with an awareness of just how arch they are. Going Under manages to make sure that these goofy characters have just enough motivation and conflict that their team dynamic and frustrations with their job seem believable and empathetic, without trying to force actual depth on them that they couldn't support. The game also knows, broadly, who it holds in contempt. It isn't rank-and-file employees, but a system of perverse incentives propped up by complicit management who are more than comfortable leaving employees to rot. Fizzle never makes sense, but neither do the other companies that went under, which is the point. They exist to suck up venture capital, make the managers' lives cushy, and then be sold. They're not a real venture aimed at actually making money. The game skewers the corporate Memphis art style of big tech with colors and character designs that evoke the art on any given big tech website. It even engages with the self-doubt instilled in Jackie by her job through confrontations with a seemingly more successful doppelganger in a business suit. It's not a trenchant, cutting criticism of Silicon Valley or an angry polemic about venture capital, but it's also not a Mondays suck coffee mug or a hang in there cat poster. It's got more teeth than that. It all feels a bit personal, familiar with and contemptful of the dysfunction of the tech industry, but always from a humanistic and humorous perspective. I also just really love the Dark Souls style victory messages whenever you defeat a boss for a given dungeon. Which actually brings up another division between Hades and Going Under. Where Hades is a single monolithic fight through the underworld in every run, Going Under is actually composed of a series of mini-dungeons that aren't all that hard to beat. It's far less interested in being a challenging, lengthy, singular roguelike arena dungeon game than using roguelike arena dungeon games as a means to explore the repetitive, arbitrary, and unfair nature of the work and to push the story forward. This also leads to each dungeon having a distinct style, from the Winky Dinks love-themed dungeon with body pillows and light S&M references and demons that blow kisses as projectiles, to the skeletal miners and prospectors and minecarts of the cryptocurrency levels, to the hodgepodge of random monsters from other dungeons you get in the co-working space. And as each mini-dungeon gets defeated, the overall plot moves forward. So where Hades might move the story of individual relationships between Zagreus and various gods forward as the game progresses while keeping the gameplay the exact same, Going Under tries to mix it up. The one problem the game really has is that it's probably a little too chaotic. The game being fully 3D means it's difficult to get a beat on the whole battlefield, and between that and how big some of the explosions and other effects can be, it simply can get too hectic to avoid damage or to make skillful decisions. Also, the one place Hades really has it beat is its breadth of dialogue. Hades seems to have new conversations with at least some characters almost every run, but you can get stuck in a bit of a dialogue slump if you're not making progress in Gone Under. Still, I think it's fascinating to see another attempt to turn roguelites into a more narrative-focused genre, especially one that takes such substantial deviations from the approach of Hades. It's got a point of view, a sense of humor, and plenty of lovely little touches like being able to listen to music in Jackie's apartment like one of those chill beats to relax and do homework to YouTube channels. Or the way Joblin drivers announce where they're going to go with a map pin, or how each room loads like a filing cabinet. If you're looking for something a bit more cutting in its commentary, I'd look to something like Eliza. But if you want a lighthearted, goofy game that places its satire of Silicon Valley in an absurd cartoon parody roguelite, it's hard not to recommend this. Till next time.